Nikita Hamilton was a few months shy of her 16th birthday when she came to the United States with her mom, Camille. It was August 1st, 2009, 2 weeks before the brutal attack. Nikki, that's what her mom calls her, was a top student at her school in Kingston, Jamaica. She was an avid reader and loved to swim and ride bikes. Nikki was Camille's only child, but they really acted more like sisters. They were inseparable, taking photos with each other, curling up to watch movies on the Lifetime channel, and traveling together. Nikki also loved to sing. Luther Vandross was a favorite, and Britney Spears. She would pretend to be Britney, singing and dancing with her trademark moves. Camille's husband at the time, Nikki's dad, was a reggae performer. He was busy a lot, so Camille and Nikki would spend hours together helping kids at an internet cafe where Camille worked. Camille says Nikki loved working with kids and dreamed of being a pediatrician someday.
I love the kids. I used to sit with them, me and Nikita. We used to sit. Because she was very smart with computer. So we used to, when she finished school, we used to at the internet cafe teach them how to use a computer and help them with their schoolwork and give them a few time, like a few minutes to play a little game and then cut the break and send them back to their schoolwork. She loved the little kids. And it was fun for me also to be there with the kids. It was a pleasure being with those little kids and helping them because we have poor kids in Jamaica. Some of them don't have any money to use the internet, so I'll just sneak them in, let them use the internet, and I used to love doing that, teaching them how to use the computer. It was a fun for me.
The kids would spend hours playing games at the cafe. Camille would have to drag them off the computers and kick them out so she could close up by 9 p.m. She wasn't always successful. When she wasn't at the cafe, you might find Camille in the kitchen. She loved to cook. One of her favorites was a Jamaican specialty, ackee and saltfish. Saltfish is often a fish like cod that's been dried and cured in salt to make it last longer. Camille would boil it, slice it, and add ackee. That's the national fruit of Jamaica, but it's usually used like a vegetable. She'd also add onions, peppers, tomatoes, thyme, and seasoning. Camille would serve the dish with green bananas or roasted breadfruit. That's a fruit with an unusual flavor. When cooked, it tastes something like freshly baked bread. When Camille would visit the United States, she'd help cook the ackee and saltfish at a South Florida Jamaican restaurant run by her aunt. Around 2008, Camille was at a wedding in Jamaica. She saw a woman sitting by herself and decided to go talk to her and keep her company. Her name was Faith Bissessor, and the two hit it off. Faith was also from Jamaica, but lived in Florida. She was a quiet and hardworking woman. She was a nurse in the emergency room at Jackson Memorial Hospital in Miami. She was on call a lot. After the wedding, Camille and Faith became close. They talked on the phone often and got together when they could. One of those times was during a trip to New York. It wasn't a happy visit. They were there for a funeral. But it had snowed, and Camille and Faith couldn't help brightening the mood by playing in the snow, throwing it at each other and laughing. Faith would say, "Camille, you're fun to be around. You know how to cheer people up." They shopped together, often for clothes. Camille liked fashion. And she liked giving Faith home decorating tips when she was visiting her friend in Florida. "Put marble in the kitchen," she would suggest. "Change the furniture in the guest room." Faith was 49, 10 years older than Camille in August 2009. But despite the age gap, the two had become good friends. Perhaps their friendship was made stronger because they had something significant in common. Faith also had a teenager. Her son, Davian, was the same age as Camille's daughter, Nikita. "15-year-old Davian Bishop was a top student at Stranahan High School in Fort Lauderdale.
I go to church with them one Sunday, and he was playing. Such a nice kid. And I can recall his mom said to me once, you know that Davian get a computer and a phone from school and he gave it away before he take it home? And I was like, Davian, did you do that? And he said, yes, Auntie Camila, I did. And I said, why did he? He said, those kids need it and I have a computer already. He was so smart, sweet kid.
Davian and Nikita hadn't met yet, but the two teens talked on the phone. Their conversations would sometimes go to schoolwork. Davian helped Nikita with her math. They finally meet in August 2009 when Camille comes to Florida and brings Nikita with her. Camille is working as a live-in caretaker for an elderly woman who lives in Lake Worth, not far from West Palm Beach. Faith wants Davian and Nikita to spend time together and get to know each other. She invites Nikita to stay at her place. Camille is apprehensive, but finally agrees to let her daughter stay there. It would only be for a few days after all. She just didn't want any kissing. It's a couple days into Nikki's stay on Encino Street, August 16th. She wants some different food than what's in Faith's house, so she calls her mom and asks if she can bring her some snacks. Pretzels and Doritos, please. Camille finishes up taking care of the elderly woman she works for, making sure she takes her scheduled pills. She borrows the woman's Mercury Sable, as she sometimes does, and then drives the 50 miles south to Faith's house with groceries. She pulls into the driveway sometime around 11 p.m. She plans to return to Lake Worth and isn't expecting to be there for long. Nikita and Davian come outside to help with the groceries.
The first thing I said to Nikki when I went there that night, did you guys kiss? And she said, Mom! Stop it, Mom. Not knowing they would go.
While all three are outside, a man appears, out of nowhere. And he has a gun. He's demanding money and orders them into the home. What the man looks like and what exactly happens in the house over the next 14 or so hours, we can't know for certain. What we do know is that Camille is the only one who will survive the night. Five days after Camille Hamilton was found by police, Miramar detective Steve Toyota went by her hospital room. Earlier in the day, she had been trying to help the police artist create a sketch of her attacker. The first time Detective Toyota was here was minutes after Camille was brought in with a gunshot wound to her face. He was the first detective to interview her after the attack, but she was barely able to speak. That time, he wasn't even sure she was going to survive. But she did, and Detective Toyota's been back to the hospital since. By the visit on August 22nd, Camille had improved substantially. Toyota brought along his partner to video record the interview. Detective Hector Bertrand had been on the Miramar force for about 17 years. He and Steve Toyota were friends, too. When they were working together as narcotics detectives, they were honored together as the co-officers of the year. They were credited with seizing 30 kilos of cocaine, along with more than 400 pounds of marijuana and other illegal drugs. In Camille's hospital room, Detective Bertrand started the video camera recording, and his partner asked Camille to walk through what happened on the night of August 16th. Although the interview was recorded, Camille's jaw was wired shut, and she's at times hard to understand. Reporter Stephen Hobbs explains her recollection of the attack.
Well, Camille's memory about what happened was inconsistent over the many statements that she gave to detectives. You wouldn't expect for her memory to be perfect in a situation like this. I mean, she went through a traumatic event, let alone what damage could have been caused by the bullet that hit her. But in this interview, in the 9 total recorded interviews that she gave to Detective Toyota, you really see that there are inconsistencies in some of the details that she remembers. And Toyota was concerned about some of those inconsistencies, so they did what was called a cognitive interview, where she sat down with a law enforcement officer, and it wasn't the rapid-fire responses that she was having to get at her hospital bed. She was able to sit and relax and try to tell what she remembered and recalled from those incidents. And it's not her fault that she was not able to remember every particular detail of what was going on. But it was really important for the detectives to try to get to her to remember as much as they can. It's not always clear from all of her statements how many details that she actually remembers on her own, or how many of the details were built up over the many interviews that she gave with the detective.
Through all of the interviews with Camille, Detective Toyota put together bits and pieces of what happened at the Encino Street home that night. The detective would later summarize her descriptions in an arrest affidavit. It went like this. After Camille and the kids unload the car, she gets ready to leave, saying goodbye to Davian and Nikita in the driveway. Then, a man with a gun comes up to her from behind. He demands money and orders the three into the home. While inside, the man again asks for money. Camille gives him some, around $80. The man then forces them upstairs. That's where Faith is, in the master bedroom. He directs them inside her room and orders Faith to bind Davian, Nikita, and Camille's hands and feet with duct tape. Then the man tapes up Faith, and somehow the gun ends up on the floor. Camille makes a move. She crawls over and picks up the gun, then crawls away into the nearby guest bedroom. In there, Camille fires 2 shots. It doesn't appear either hit the man, and he's able to get the gun back from her. He drags her into the hallway and threatens to sexually assault her. Camille resists. And he shoots her. About 14 hours later, she wakes up. Her face is caked in dried blood, and she goes into an upstairs bathroom and tries to wash it out of her eyes. She's able to get her cell phone. She dials and a man picks up. It was a friend she had talked to the night before. She's been shot, she tells her friend. He's the one who calls 911.
There's a friend of mine on the phone. She's incoherent. She said she was shot in the face.
She was what in the face?
Shot. She was shot in the face.
She was shot in the face?
Yes.
It seems clear from Detective Toyota's summary what happened in the house that night, but he left out moments where she contradicted herself, including the orders she and the others were taped up, the sexual assault threat, the amount of money the man took, and her movements after she woke up. Our investigation of the many interviews and depositions Camille would give after the shooting shows that her recollections were not as clear as he made them seem. That includes her description of the attacker.
At first, she initially said that she didn't really get a good look at the man. Then she said he might have had a mask or something partially covering his face, maybe a t-shirt or the collar of his shirt. And at some point, it had fallen off. But then later in that cognitive interview that she gave, she said that the best look that she got at the attacker was outside in the driveway. Obviously, if it was dark and we don't really know exactly what the lighting was like. So there was real questions about how much of his face that she actually remembered seeing. And then there were times where she said that he was maybe wearing a hat or something covering his head.
Another key detail for detectives was whether or not the man was wearing gloves.
So gloves were important because if the perpetrator wasn't wearing gloves, maybe DNA was left on the scene. So initially, in that first day in the hospital, she said she didn't remember the man wearing gloves. Then later that day in another interview, she said he was wearing gloves. And then within, the next few weeks, she called back the detective and said, Detective Toyota, and said that he was definitely not wearing gloves.
And there were more inconsistencies. The murdered victims had been bound with duct tape in the master bedroom. Detective Toyota asked Camille where the attacker got the duct tape.
So the question about the duct tape was really important for detectives. They couldn't be sure which roll of duct tape was used. There were 3 found in the master bedroom, but there was one that was found right next to the victims. Now, sometimes Camille said that the perpetrator took the duct tape out of his pocket, but other times she said she wasn't sure where exactly the duct tape came from.
There's a mysterious part of the crime scene Detective Toyota needed Camille's help to solve. The victims were found on the floor of the master bedroom, so it seems that's where they had been shot. But in the guest room, officers found a bullet, 2 bullet casings, 2 bullet holes, and a strand of used duct tape. How did they get there? Detective Toyota didn't have an answer to that question by his interview with Camille on August 22nd, so he brought it up with her. He asked, "At any point did you take the gun from him?" Camille responded, "I think so, I don't know." Toyota said, "The other day you told me you got the gun from him and shot at him twice." She would go on to say she did fire the gun in front of Faith's bathroom after the man dropped it. But that didn't match evidence at the crime scene, where a bullet and used bullet shells were found in the guest bedroom. Later in the interview, the gun came up again.
So this time, later on in the interview, Camille brings up the gun again. She says, "Did you find out if I fired the gun? Did you test my hand?" And the detective responds that he wasn't sure. He didn't remember them doing any type of testing for any type of gunshot residue or anything on her hand.
Detective Toyota kept asking Camille to recall more details about this unknown piece of the crime scene puzzle, how and where she was able to get the gun. In doing so, he told her details about what investigators found at the crime scene. But what did Camille actually remember? It's not as clear as the affidavit later made it seem. Here's a clip from the recording of the hospital room interview with Camille. Again, she's a bit hard to understand.
The reason that it's real important, I was asking about where exactly you were, because there are a couple of shots that were fired that are in the guest bedroom. Okay. And that's why I wanted to make sure when you fired the shots at him, were you in Faith's room or were you in another room? You've been in that house before, right? You've been in the house several times, would you say?
One.
To Faith's house.
I always stay there.
You always stay there. So you know the layout of the whole house, right?
Yeah.
Davian's room, Faith's room, the bathroom. Okay. Let's see. And that's why I was asking about, you sure you're in Faith's room? Because there's a couple gunshots that are in the guest room that kind of look like that could have taken place there, you firing at him.
Maybe.
Maybe? Do you remember if you were ever on the guest bed?
I don't remember.
You don't remember. Okay.
So Detective Toyota, through a spokeswoman, declined my request for an interview. But he testified later that he knew that Camille was inconsistent in the statements that she was giving. One of the things that he said was he believed Camille was telling him as much as she knew. But he believed that she was able to see enough of the attacker during the incident to get a description of what he looked like. There were a couple things that puzzled them about bullet holes that they found in there. And how it might relate to Camille is they found that it appeared one of the bullets that was fired in there was fired from the bed in a downward direction. But the second one was that there was also a bullet fired maybe possibly next to the bed, fired upwards towards the door frame. And potentially why that could be significant is, from what the detectives described, is that if Camille was able to get away with the gun, she possibly could have been on the ground beside the bed as the attacker came into the room and maybe tried to fire at him and missed, but fired, at the door frame, either above him or to the side of him a little bit. So potentially there are pieces of evidence in there that might say that Camille maybe did fire a gun at the attacker. She also had some cuts on her knees that a crime scene technician later noted that could have been caused by her maybe scooting into the other room on her knees to get away with the gun. The inconsistencies are important because it's once again not Camille's fault how much she remembers or doesn't remember, but detectives and prosecutors have to rely on her memory as evidence in a court case. In a situation where her memory is so important and so crucial, it can really impact a criminal case and how it moves forward.
Camille's contradictions will become a significant factor in the case in the years that followed. Some of Camille's memories of her attacker were more consistent. She said the man smelled stinky and dirty. He had gold teeth, she said, but only on the bottom row. He was slim, maybe 20-something. Then there was the facial hair. For the police artist sketch, she said the man had a thin mustache. This would also play a major role in the case. For now, detectives had the sketch an artist had made with Camille's help. Copies were distributed to police agencies and to the public in South Florida. Tips came in by the dozens, but they led to a series of dead ends. Police in Miami ran the sketch through facial recognition software. It came up with 2 possible names. Neither panned out. More names came in from others, including anonymous tips. Investigators in Miramar scoured their own databases, searching for men with violent criminal pasts who matched Camille's description. The county crime lab compared possible suspects to fingerprints taken from the murder scene. But the days became weeks and the weeks became months. There were no breaks. After Camille left the hospital, Detective Toyota spent more time with her, one day showing her photographs and driving her around. He stopped several people, hoping something, anything would trigger her memory. It didn't. In November, Toyota showed Camille 39 photographs of different possible suspects. According to the detective's notes, Camille said that one photo resembled her attacker, but she wasn't 100% sure. That man's fingerprints were sent for testing. Nothing. Another month went by and the detective tried again. This time he showed Camille more photographs. Again, she identified a man as resembling her attacker. His fingerprints were also a swab, a drop or 2 of water, some alcohol, an acid-based solution, and hydrogen peroxide. The swab turned pink. It was blood. The swabs were sent to the crime lab for more testing. But for some reason, the blood had been sitting out in the hot and humid Florida weather for days before it was collected. It may have degraded, and the lab was unable to find a DNA profile. Blood was found in another unusual spot. It was in the Mercury Sable that Camille Hamilton borrowed on the night of the murders. She had parked it outside the house when she got there. Police found the glove box opened and papers piled on the passenger seat and on the floor. Camille had no explanation for this. That wasn't how the car usually looked. Near the car's back window was another roll of duct tape. It's the 5th one found at the scene. 3 were in the master bedroom, plus 1 in the garage. The roll in the car was collected as evidence along with the others. But something even more interesting was discovered inside the car. Tissues with reddish stains were found on the floor in front of the passenger seat. The stains looked like blood. This time, a sample came back with a name. But that too became a dead end. The blood belonged to Camille's daughter Nikita, one of the victims in the house. Camille said she didn't know how it got there. She didn't remember any blood in the car. Detectives would never get an explanation for how Nikita's blood ended up there. 8 months have passed since the murders. It's April 21st, 2010. DNA tests on evidence from inside and outside the Encino Street home hadn't produced any suspects. They just created more questions. Still searching for a lead, detectives Steve Toyota and Hector Bertrand tried again with more forensic tests. They focused on the duct tape. And there was a lot of it. All of the murdered victims had been bound around their ankles with it. 2 had their wrists bound. A strip of tape was found in the guest bedroom. In fact, there were 5 rolls in total found at the scene. One of them was on a table along the east wall of the master bedroom, just a few feet from the victims. The detectives couldn't be sure that was the roll that was used to bind Faith, Davian, and Nikita. There were 2 others found in the same room. One on a table across the room and another in a nearby armoire. But it was the closest roll to the bodies. Thin strips had been peeled off the roll unevenly, so one side had more tape left on it than the other. A close look at the roll revealed a small, reddish stain. It could be blood, but by April 2010, parts of the tape had already been tested, and no DNA of a possible suspect had been found. Except this time, investigators had a new idea to try to get DNA off the roll. It would start with a bottle of liquid you can buy at a craft store. Undo is a household product that can help remove adhesives, like labels or tape. The idea to use it came from the County Crime Lab's DNA unit manager. A bit of a Hail Mary in a stalled investigation. An investigator put Undo on a cotton swab. He then brushed the swab on the roll of duct tape thought to have been used by the killer. If there were cells containing DNA sticking to the tape, the Undo might help free them. He swabbed different parts of the roll. Now the samples were in the hands of the lab. Detectives would have to wait to find out if the technique would pay off. DNA testing is a complicated process that takes time. The technology is constantly changing, and testing has become more sensitive over the years. It's moved beyond blood and other bodily fluids. Analysts can now use minuscule amounts of DNA, like from skin cells, to crack cases. A sample from the roll of duct tape is put in a small tube. Chemicals are added and the tube is heated. The goal is to break up cells in the sample and release their DNA. Once that's done, the analyst will know if there's any testable DNA. The DNA is copied over and over so that even those tiny amounts can be evaluated. The DNA from the tape is then reviewed and a profile uploaded to a state law enforcement database that includes people convicted of and arrested for crimes. On July 12, 2010, nearly a year after the murders, Detective Toyota gets the call from the crime lab and finally catches a break. The DNA on the duct tape returned a name. He's a man who has been in prison before. Black, American, thin, and in his early 30s. Similar to what Camille Hamilton described. His name is Kevin Pratt. In 1995, Kevin was sentenced to 3 years in prison for a robbery. In 1998, he got a year in prison for striking an officer with the vehicle and fleeing police. He also got charged for carrying a concealed gun during that incident. More recently, in 2008, he got arrested for a couple indecent exposure incidents, including one in Jacksonville. In that case, he pleaded no contest. He also had multiple run-ins with police across Florida, and a few months before the DNA hit had been charged with battery on a law enforcement officer and resisting arrest with violence. Nearly 3 months after the Encino Street murders, an officer in the Orlando area stopped Kevin because he fit the description of a man involved in an attempted robbery. An officer collected a DNA sample even though he wasn't accused in the robbery. It was at least his second sample added to the state's database. And there's more. 2 other encounters police had with Kevin Pratt put him close to the time and place of the murders. The first one happened a little more than a week before and just a couple miles away. An officer saw Kevin panhandling at a nearby intersection. He didn't note anything in the report about Kevin's appearance, but later the officer said he remembered he had a beard. The other, a report from a police officer in Miami-Dade County, revealed that Kevin had been stopped just over the county line, around 4 miles from the murder scene. The officer noted in his report that Kevin had short and curly black hair and a beard/goatee. That was around 11:50 p.m. on August 15th. Almost exactly 24 hours later, Camille Hamilton arrived on Encino Street in the Mercury Sable, carrying snacks for her daughter. Detectives had caught a huge break in the murder case. If Kevin Pratt's DNA was on the duct tape, it could mean he was at the murder scene. But DNA evidence can be a tricky thing. Sometimes, like in this case, the results aren't so simple. The crime lab report said that the sample from the roll of duct tape looked like it had DNA from at least 3 different people. Camille Hamilton couldn't be ruled out as one of those people. Kevin Pratt couldn't either. His DNA is similar to what was found on the tape. That's why the state database generated a hit. When DNA from multiple people is found on a piece of evidence, the results get muddied. It's not always clear where the DNA from one person overlaps with another. When that happens, analysts use a probability formula to evaluate the strength of the similarity between the DNA from the evidence and a possible suspect. In this case, the analysts calculated a probability.
The chances that an unrelated person have similar DNA to what was found on the duct tape is 1 in 460,000. And that Kevin isn't the only one who has DNA that is similar to what was found on the duct tape. So this 460,000 number is not insignificant, but in some cases where DNA from a suspect and a piece of evidence are very similar, that number can be in the billions.
The crime lab's DNA manager tells detectives Toyota and Bertrand the news. It's not a strong enough number to solve the case. Still, Toyota hopes he has enough to arrest Kevin. On July 13, 2010, the day after learning about the results,